In the year 2005, in the month of August, New Orleans, Louisiana faced massive flooding from Hurricane Katrina, which was a Category 5 hurricane. But was the flooding really all from the hurricane? Reports showed that it was not from the hurricane, but in fact, from an engineering failure with the levee. So what possibly could have gone wrong that would have caused this much destruction that so easily could have been blamed on a hurricane? After Hurricane Katrina, the government commenced an investigation into the levee to see what went wrong with this levee that caused this much damage. And upon investigation, it was found that there was major structural issues with this levee. This major structural issue was the soil that this levee was built on. When building a levee, engineers are supposed to test the soil to see if the soil can handle a levee being built and the amount of force it's going to endure with a levee being there. And if it's going to have enough force to counteract the forces it's going to endure. Well, when testing the soil, engineers read the graph as saying that they could build a levee there and the soil would be able to handle it, when in fact the graph and the data were saying the exact opposite. And because they misread the data, they didn't know that extra materials were going to have to go into this levee to make it be able to handle the immense amount of pressure that it was going to be on there for a hurricane, especially a hurricane like Hurricane Katrina. But this wasn't the only problem that was found. There was also overtopping, which happens when the wall side of the levee on the water side and the sand on the other side, there's a divot that gets created, and that divot fills with water, and the water eventually ends up going over the levee. And when this happens, it erodes the other side of the levee, known as the dry side. And this means that there's less counteracting force on the dry side, which makes the levee more vulnerable to the forces of the water. And not only were these two main structural issues such a big reason that this levee failed, but also the level of safety that these engineers were using on the factor of safety scale. They were at a 1.3. A 1.3 is known as the very low end of an acceptable engineering practice for structures like a levee. So why were engineers using this safety scale? Maybe when we investigate into their values, we'll learn more. The group of engineers used for this project were the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Their two main values are integrity and quality. Their values are not only their values, but also their standards, and they expect nothing less than quality as a standard. Then why was the quality of the levee so poor that so many structural issues took place? Well, this math didn't make sense to me. So I dug a little deeper. What I found was slightly shocking, but really interesting. U.S. Department of Justice states that former U.S. Army Corps of Engineers managers sentenced to more than 19 years in prison for $30 million bribery and kickback scam involved steering off government contracts. It was found that a construction official for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers agreed to accept approximately $299,000 from a sand and gravel subcontractor in exchange for providing confidential information used by the Corps to evaluate the levee after Katrina. So, if a construction official was doing this after Katrina for the rebuilding of the levee, what bribery was happening during the initial building of the levee? Enough went on before Katrina that a fraud task force was made after Katrina, and it was found that 764 defendants had committed federal crimes out of the 61 cases that they had open. The fraud and bribes weren't the only issue in this company, though, unfortunately. The engineers were put under so much stress during the building of the levee due to the company taking on projects that they couldn't handle. But everybody wanted to use them because they pride themselves on quality. So, when they were getting close to timelines or exceeding the timelines they had given companies or given cities, they got a lot of pushback, and their management didn't like this. So, the person who faced all the stress were the engineers. So, them misreading the soil graph could have been them seeing what they wanted to see so that they could stay on track with the schedule for the levee. If I could go back in time, the changes I would make is I would put the worst case scenario at the top of my list. I would plan for the worst case scenario when building a levee. That way, if the worst case scenario doesn't happen, at least you'll be able to handle something that's not the worst case scenario, but close to it. Another thing I would change is I would have taken the soil graph to somebody else to look at, to get an outside engineer's opinion to make sure I was reading the graph right, especially if I'm under that much stress.